Close your eyes for a moment. Picture a vast and unforgiving expanse of golden sand, a completely barren landscape where the scorching sun dictates the very rhythm of survival. Now open them, and watch as that same hostile wasteland morphs in record time into the undeniable global capital of absolute excess. We are looking at a seemingly magical transformation from a humble pearl diving and fishing village into a shimmering megalopolis, a futuristic utopia that literally spits gold out of specially designed atmospheric telling machines. You see artificial islands shaped like palm trees that dare to defy the ocean currents, alongside a fully automated glass tube metro system that looks exactly like it was pulled straight out of a science fiction blockbuster. The ambition of this desert city is pure, intoxicating, and undeniably magnetic. But as the glittering dust settles, we must ask ourselves a very dangerous question. Is this breathtaking achievement entirely real, or are we simply gazing up at a towering giant standing on feet of brittle clay? Look closely at the cracks forming in the crystal facade. There are millions of dollars worth of supercars rotting quietly under the blistering desert sun. There are ghostly mega-projects standing as hollow monuments to forgotten promises. These silent witnesses strongly suggest that a systemic collapse might be much closer than the carefully curated tourism brochures are telling us. Get ready, because today we are going directly behind the velvet rope. We are going to uncover the hidden face of unparalleled luxury, stripping away the brilliant marketing campaigns to reveal the raw economic and social reality beneath. This is not just a story about tall buildings and expensive toys. This is a story about vulnerability, hubris, and the limits of engineering human environments with borrowed money. Welcome to the ultimate analytical deep dive into the horrifying truth behind the City of Gold and the alarming phenomena that may very well be marking the end of an era. Do not look away, because the true cost of this desert miracle will leave you absolutely speechless. This staggering ecological disregard is magnified 100-fold when we look at the coastline. If you look at promotional satellite imagery, you will inevitably see the famous artificial landmasses extending out into the blue waters of the Gulf. For a long time, the global media focused entirely on the successfully completed palm-shaped island, but they conveniently ignore the massive, catastrophic failures floating right next to it. Let us talk about the World Islands and the Palm Jebel Ali. The World Islands was supposed to be the ultimate statement of geographical dominance, an artificial archipelago constructed from dredged sand to resemble a map of the entire globe. It was pitched to ultra-wealthy investors as the ultimate status symbol. You could literally own a country. But behind that spectacular marketing pitch lies a completely irreversible ecological tragedy and a financial black hole. To create these luxury paradises for billionaires, ancient coral reefs were systematically crushed. Natural sea currents were permanently altered, causing previously flowing waters to become highly stagnant. This stagnation actively kills local marine ecosystems and creates massive, foul-smelling algae blooms. Financially, this terraforming plan proved to be utterly disastrous. We witnessed the terrifying fragility of this real estate model during the global financial crisis of 2008. Construction on the World Islands completely stopped. Hundreds of these artificial landmasses were entirely abandoned by panicked investors who simply vanished when the credit dried up. Left entirely unmaintained, these multi-million-dollar piles of sand slowly began sinking back into the ocean, violently reclaimed by the very tides they sought to conquer. Today, the vast majority of the world remains completely undeveloped, a ghostly archipelago of barren sand shifting back into the sea. The exact same fate befell Palm Jebel Ali. It was designed to be 50% larger than the original Palm Island, meant to house over 250,000 people. It was completely abandoned in 2008, remaining a massive, desolate crescent of sand for over 15 years. These sunken mega-projects represent the ultimate real estate bubble. The environment was permanently sacrificed for a quick burst of speculative profit that, The moment global demand dropped even slightly, left behind massive, unsustainable infrastructure rotting under the relentless sun. The staggering maintenance cost required just to keep the sea from swallowing these properties is astronomically high, proving that you cannot permanently buy your way out of the laws of nature. If the natural environment is buckling under the pressure of unbridled development, we must shift our gaze to the people who are actually physically propping up all this monumental infrastructure. This is where the polished reality hits the absolute hardest. The demographic structure of this glittering city is a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate. Out of the entire bustling population, only a tiny fraction of about 15% are actual native citizens. The other 85% is a massive, shifting tide of temporary expatriate workers who literally hold the entire city up on their tired shoulders. Millions of ambitious individuals from South Asia, Southeast Asia, and North Africa arrive every single year in search of life-changing economic opportunity, only to immediately hit an invisible, impenetrable wall. In this deeply entrenched system, there is absolutely no pathway to naturalized citizenship. There is no permanent residency available for the working class. Your entire existence in the city is strictly conditioned upon your continuous employment. We are talking about a heavily structured social model where your fundamental human rights, your upward mobility, and your entire future depend entirely on the color of your passport and the goodwill of your corporate sponsor. While a tiny minority at the very top enjoys practically infinite state benefits, subsidized housing, and ultimate security, the massive blue-collar workforce building the skyscrapers and maintaining the luxury hotels has absolutely no real stake in the future of the city. They live in crowded labor camps located far out in the industrial periphery, completely hidden away from the gleaming tourist centers. Once they have earned enough money to send back to their families, or once their bodies simply give out from the grueling physical labor under the desert sun, they leave. If they commit the smallest infraction, or attempt to unionize to demand better working conditions, they are swiftly and aggressively deported. Can any modern society truly survive in the long term when the vast majority of its inhabitants are treated as entirely disposable, interchangeable parts? It is a highly fragile, incredibly unequal, and above all, entirely unsustainable balance. If a severe global recession were to hit, triggering a mass exodus of these foreign workers, the results would be apocalyptic. Overnight, basic municipal services would completely collapse. The futuristic infrastructures would turn into empty glass skeletons with absolutely no one to clean, secure, or operate them. Culturally, the city remains a fascinating puzzle with completely missing pieces. Because the population is so transient and temporary, it fails to create a deep, organic cultural identity of its own. It is just a constant, flowing river of people passing through an expensive transit lounge, leaving the city incredibly vulnerable to sudden, catastrophic depopulation. This extreme vulnerability is not just limited to the working class. It heavily infects the highest echelons of the expatriate community. Let us turn our attention to an image that has confused and fascinated the internet for years, revealing the dark underbelly of leveraged wealth. Imagine walking through the dusty parking lots of international airport terminals, expecting to see rental cars and family sedans. Instead, what you witness is not a dealership, but a tragic graveyard of metal, leather, and shattered dreams. Hundreds of Lamborghinis, Bentleys, Ferraris, and custom Mercedes vehicles lie completely abandoned to their fate, collecting thick layers of desert sand. Many of these mechanical masterpieces still have the keys left right in the ignition. Others contain a makeshift apology letter scribbled hastily on the dashboard. Why in the world would anyone, no matter how wealthy, simply walk away from a literal fortune on wheels? The answer revolves entirely around the incredibly strict financial and debt laws governing the region. In many parts of the Western world, failing to pay a bank loan, defaulting on a mortgage, or declaring corporate bankruptcy is treated strictly as a civil matter. It is a mathematical process of restructuring, a chance to wipe the slate clean and start over. Here, the reality is drastically different. Until very recent tentative reforms were introduced, failing to honor financial obligations or even bouncing a single check was essentially a one-way ticket to a crowded prison cell. Faced with the terrifying prospect of imminent financial collapse and the total loss of their personal freedom, affluent expatriate moguls and ambitious investors found themselves backed into a terrifying corner. When the global markets shifted and their heavily leveraged wealth evaporated, they chose the only logical avenue for survival. They chose sudden, desperate exile. These individuals would drive their luxury vehicles directly to the airport, flee the country with only the clothes on their backs, and leave their prized possessions behind as silent, tragic witnesses to a ruthless economic system that leaves absolutely no room for failure. The supreme irony of this situation is how the system responds to the tragedy. Local authorities and private auction houses routinely round up these luxury junkyards, turning them into a highly profitable secondary market and an unintended tourist niche. Curious visitors actually travel to the industrial outskirts just to photograph the decay of immense wealth. This proves that much of the extreme wealth you see displayed openly on the streets is heavily leveraged, bought entirely on aggressive credit, and maintained by a constant, exhausting fear of systemic punishment. That same philosophy of living far beyond sustainable means is deeply embedded in the very architecture of the skyline. The obsession with building the biggest, fastest, and most expensive structures hides a terrifying financial reality. Even the absolute brightest icon on the famous skyline hides a deep, lingering scar of financial humility. The tallest tower on Earth, soaring past 800 meters into the clouds, is undeniably a peerless architectural feat. It weighs as much as 100,000 elephants and boasts a surface area equivalent to 17 massive sports fields. But many people conveniently forget that it was not originally going to carry its current name. For years during construction, it was proudly named after the city itself. That was until the devastating financial crash left the massive tower completely paralyzed, heavily in debt, and entirely penniless. The proud city essentially had to be rescued from total bankruptcy by its much richer, oil-heavy neighbor. As a strict condition for accepting the multi-billion-dollar bailout check, they were forced to change the name of their crowning achievement in honor of the rescuing leader. It is the ultimate concrete proof that underneath the shimmering glass and polished steel, this entire miracle depends entirely on the continuous influx of external money. Furthermore, maintaining this colossal giant is terrifyingly expensive. Just washing the exterior glass takes 3 entire months of dangerous labor and millions of dollars, not to mention the brutal electrical cost required to constantly cool the interior against the extreme exterior heat. This duality between massive pride and structural fragility is perfectly summarized by the giant golden picture frame monument erected in the city center. It was designed to visually connect the humble historical neighborhoods on one side with the galactic futuristic skyline on the other. It is poetic, yes, but it is also a deeply haunting metaphor. Because while the developers are incredibly busy framing their own success, the actual foundation holding that heavy picture together is starting to show massive structural cracks that can no longer be easily covered up with gold leaf. Furthermore, the original architect who won the international competition to design the frame claims his intellectual property was simply taken without proper credit or the financial contract he was rightfully owed. This leaves an incredibly uncomfortable question about professional ethics and international copyright law permanently staining the creative reputation of the region. They prioritize the visual symbol of success over the actual utilitarian needs of the people, spending hundreds of millions on empty monuments, while essential infrastructure in working-class neighborhoods continues to crumble. But all of these structural, demographic, and ecological issues pale in comparison to the single biggest financial threat looming on the horizon: The entire foundation of this economic miracle was built on one incredibly powerful premise: zero taxes. For decades, it was the ultimate, undisputed tax haven that successfully attracted millions of ambitious expatriates and massive multinational corporations hungry for absolutely clean, untaxed profits. This exceptionalism was the primary engine of their explosive growth. But that beautiful dream officially ended. Under immense, crushing pressure from the international financial community to curb unregulated money laundering and conform to global banking standards, the government had to finally cave in. They officially imposed a corporate tax rate of 9%. While 9% might still seem relatively low compared to Western nations, for this specific economic model, it represents a massive, seismic shift in eras. It is the painful, public recognition that the old, unregulated rules of exceptionalism are no longer sufficient to sustain their pharaonic public spending and mounting sovereign debt. By being forced to align with standard global financial norms, the city has permanently sacrificed its single biggest competitive advantage. Right now, numerous multinational companies and wealthy expatriates are actively reevaluating their physical presence, quietly looking for the next emerging jurisdiction that will allow them to keep every single cent of their hard-earned revenue. The incredibly powerful magnet that successfully pulled in world-class talent and infinite capital is slowly starting to lose its absolute strength. This financial tightening is happening at the exact same time as a massive tourism crisis. The post-pandemic economic landscape has seen a drastic oversupply of luxury hotel rooms in the city, forcing aggressive price slashing that destroys profit margins. But the real existential threat comes from right next door. The massive awakening of neighboring Saudi Arabia and its aggressive economic diversification plans present a terrifying challenge. With trillions of dollars backing futuristic megacities and completely untouched historical sites opening to the world, the neighboring kingdom is actively poaching the exact same demographic of high-spending international tourists. Suddenly, the unique selling proposition of the City of Gold is no longer unique. The aggressive push to attract budget transit tourists to fill the empty hotel rooms has slowly diluted the exclusive luxury brand that the city spent decades carefully cultivating. This golden glow enveloping the city streets is not just beautiful architectural decoration. It is the desperate glue struggling to hold an incredibly fragile system together on the absolute brink of the abyss. The aggressive marketing campaigns have successfully sold the world the beautiful dream that the sky is the absolute limit. But when we take a magnifying glass to the reality, we see a highly leveraged city running a frantic, exhausting race against its own geography and economic nature. We see a sprawling desert oasis consuming millions of liters of artificially manufactured water just to grow flowers, pumping toxic brine back into dying oceans. We see multi-million-dollar artificial archipelagos like the world islands completely abandoned and slowly sinking back into the waves, monuments to the ultimate real estate bubble. We see a rigid social model where a staggering 85% of the actual population remains completely invisible, temporary, and entirely disposable. We see a legal system that historically forces wealthy investors to abandon their exotic supercars at the airport to escape debtor prison. And finally, we see a once invincible tax haven completely losing its competitive edge, struggling to pay for its massive architectural upkeep while fiercely defending its vital tourism market from aggressive new regional rivals. Is this truly the glorious future of human civilization? Or is it simply the most incredibly expensive, highly leveraged mirage ever constructed in human history? The cold mathematical reality is that absolutely no city can survive forever based entirely on the production of visual spectacle and the dangerous assumption of infinite economic growth. The underground oil reservoirs funding the broader region are slowly running out. The brutal desert climate does not forgive ecological arrogance, and international capital is notoriously cowardly. Money will always flee at the very first visible sign of systemic weakness. What currently shines today with the blinding strength of 1,000 suns under the clear Arabian sky may very well tomorrow be remembered by historians as the ultimate tragic lesson in human humility, carved deeply in shattered glass and shifting sand. We have just walked thoroughly through the alarming economic, social, and ecological phenomena that are actively cracking the foundation of this desert empire. The facade is beautiful, but the structural integrity is failing. This video is an independent analytical essay based entirely on macroeconomic data, geopolitical trends, and publicly available financial reports. It is intended strictly for educational purposes to examine global urban development models and does not represent a direct attack on any nation, culture, or specific group of people. Now, the final question is entirely for you to answer. Do you truly believe that this ambitious city will manage to execute a miraculous soft landing by reinventing its entire economy? Or are we all currently sitting in the front row, about to witness the spectacular bursting of the single biggest economic bubble of the 21st century? Let me know your detailed thoughts down in the comments section below. If you appreciated this deep, uncompromising journey into the hidden depths of global luxury and economic truth, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next major analytical deep dive. Thank you so much for joining me until the very end, and I will see you in the next video.